Hey everyone, Teo here. Today I'm going to compare the Huawei MatePad Pro 10.8 inch 2021 versus the Xiaomi Pad 5 2021 from the perspective of an artist. I will be comparing the pen performance later on, the Huawei M Pencil 2nd generation versus the Xiaomi Smart Pen. Let me start by saying that it would be a fair comparison if I actually have the MatePad 11 versus the Xiaomi tablet, because the specifications for the MatePad 11 is quite similar to the Xiaomi tablet. But I don't have the MatePad 11, I only have the MatePad Pro. There are a few other things you should know. The MatePad 11 is noticeably cheaper compared to the MatePad Pro. The MatePad 11 has a display with 120Hz refresh rate, while the MatePad Pro only has a display with 60Hz refresh rate. Let me just put the specifications up on the screen for you to see so that you can compare them at a glance. I don't want to talk too much about the specifications because I have already talked about them in great detail in the individual reviews for these three tablets. Alright, let me just give you the bottom line up front. In terms of the design, in terms of the look and feel, the Huawei MatePad tablet actually looks and feels slightly better compared to the Xiaomi tablet. The one thing that I really like about this Huawei tablet is the edges here are curved, they are rounded off, and it's really comfortable to hold compared to the flat edges of the Xiaomi tablet. So when it comes to how nice the tablet feels, I like the Huawei tablet. But when it comes to the OS, this is running Harmony OS, which is to say that you are not going to be able to get Google Play Store on this. You can go online to find tutorials on how you can install the Google Play Store onto Harmony OS, but do not buy this tablet thinking that you will be able to install Google Play Store, because you can't take the risk that it may not be possible to install Google Play Store. On the Xiaomi tablet, there is Google Play Store by default, so you will have access to all the drawing apps that are already available on the Google Play Store. And with Google Play Store, you also have access to all the Google apps like Gmail, Google Drive, Google Photos, Hangouts, Google Maps, YouTube. Whereas if you want to access Google Apps on the Huawei tablet, you actually have to use the web version like gmail.com, youtube.com. As for drawing apps, you would have to search for them through the Huawei App Gallery. And whenever you launch the App Gallery, they would show you a 3-second app. By the way, when it comes to bloatware, there is a lot more bloatware, a lot of extra apps and bookmarks to extra apps that Huawei has provided. Whereas on the Xiaomi tablet, surprisingly, there is very minimal bloatware. One potential deal breaker for the Huawei tablet is many of the drawing apps are not available from the Huawei App Store. For example, Sketchbook, Clip Studio, Infinite Painter, Artflow, they are all not available. The reason why I have Sketchbook and Clip Studio here is because I downloaded the APK and installed these two apps using the APK. For the apps that are available from the Huawei App Store, such as Mi Bang Paint, Sketches, Huion Sketch, Concepts, these apps have not been updated for a very long time because the developers obviously don't focus on the Huawei platform, so they don't update these apps often and you don't get updated features or tools. If you don't mind using drawing apps in Chinese language, there are many you can choose from, but when it comes to drawing apps in English, the selection is very limited. The situation may improve in the future. There may be more drawing apps, the developers may update the apps more frequently, but at the time of making this video, I cannot recommend the Huawei tablet because of the limitations, of the lack of the Google Play Store, and the selection of drawing apps is just quite limited. Let's take a look at the pen performance. Let's start with the Huawei M Pencil. Initial activation force of the Huawei M Pencil is quite low. This pen is more sensitive compared to the Xiaomi Smart Pen. So it's actually easier to draw thin lines here, make the lines thick and go back to the thin lines. Apple Pencil still has the best initial activation force, the lowest initial activation force. That's followed by the Huawei M Pencil and followed by the Samsung S Pen together with the Xiaomi Smart Pen. Note that the camera at the corner can sometimes get in the way of the user interface elements. This is the Xiaomi Smart Pen. I can start a thin line very easily, and when I make it thick and want to go back to the thin line, it's very difficult. So here I'm trying to draw with as minimal amount of pressure as I can, and you can see the lines, they are still quite thick. If I try to draw with almost no pressure, the line would break. This difference in initial activation force means it's more difficult and challenging to draw lines that taper smoothly on the Xiaomi tablet. Let me show you how lines should taper. See how these lines taper so smoothly, so nicely. Whereas on the Xiaomi tablet, the lines, they taper very abruptly. See the difference between the strokes here versus the strokes here. If you draw a lot of comics or you draw line art, your line art will appear more expressive on the Huawei tablet because you can get those thin and thick strokes very easily. On the Xiaomi tablet, even if you use a good brush, you are not going to get that level of line variation compared to the Huawei tablet. It's going to feel like you're drawing with a marker that can only produce lines with consistent thickness. So if you take a look at these two sketches, I can get more variation with the lines here. I can get the thin and thick lines more easily, whereas here, yes, I can get thin lines occasionally, but the difference between the thin and the thick lines, it's not that obvious. And also the strokes, they don't taper that nicely. Take a look at the strokes for the hair. They taper quite abruptly. Whereas on the Huawei tablet, you can see the strokes, they taper very smoothly. This is the diagonal line jitter test on the Huawei tablet. And as you can see, there is noticeable wobble or jitter. Yeah, this is not good. And this is diagonal jitter on the Xiaomi tablet. And you can see the performance is much better. It's noticeably better. I can draw straight diagonal lines quite easily. Here's a side-by-side comparison, Xiaomi on the left and Huawei on the right. It cannot be the case where my hand is consistently shaking on the Huawei tablet, whereas on the Xiaomi tablet, my hands are more stable. Anyway, when it comes to writing, this diagonal jitter is not going to affect handwriting performance. When we are writing, we write fast. Diagonal line jitter is only more noticeable when you are drawing those diagonal lines slowly. If you draw the diagonal lines fast, the lines are going to be straight. Latency on both tablets is quite similar. Latency as in the gap between the line as it's trying to catch up with the pen tip. The size of that gap is going to be quite similar on both tablets. Pay attention to the gap between the line and the pen tip. So the gap is quite noticeable. And here's how it looks on the Xiaomi tablet. The gap is also quite noticeable. Personally, I don't see any difference between the latency. So it doesn't seem like the 120 Hz refresh rate is helping the Xiaomi tablet. Nope, I just don't see any difference. And once again, notice how the stroke ends here versus how the stroke ends here. See how this tapers and how this does not taper. Palm rejection works flawlessly on both tablets. For apps that only allow pen input for drawing, you can use your finger to draw. You can place your palm on the display and you will not introduce any stray strokes. However, if you use the pen to draw, you can get lines. Finger gestures are still supported. I'm going to talk more about drawing experience while I draw something. I'm going to draw an organic subject, leaves, and an inorganic subject, a shop front with straight lines and diagonal lines. I have the tablet on a tablet stand so that it's easier for me to draw. I can definitely see the wobbly lines and my hand is not shaking. Yep, you see the wobbly lines here? So this definitely affects accuracy. Quick strokes like this are easy. The lines will be smooth. And here I'm able to get the lines to taper quite nicely. Latency on the MatePad Pro is more noticeable compared to the Xiaomi tablet. I know earlier on I said the latency for both tablets are quite similar during the test, but when I'm actually drawing now, I can feel and see the latency. It's definitely more noticeable here on the Huawei tablet. The gap between the line and the pen tip is bigger, but it doesn't really affect my work. So it's not a deal breaker. What affects my work is actually the wobbly lines. The problem comes when you want to be precise, so you draw slower, but when you draw slower, the diagonal lines are wobbly. So you see the irony there. Anyway, this subject matter helps disguise the wobbly line because branches are not supposed to be perfectly straight. So this is the Xiaomi tablet, and now I'm using the Xiaomi pen. I've loaded the same file into MediaBank. I'm just going to continue drawing, but I will use a different color so that you can see the difference in the line quality. Alright, first thing to note here is I can get straighter lines easily. Notice the lines, they are straighter here with less wobble. So this is definitely much better performance compared to the Huawei M Pencil. The initial activation force for this pen is not as good, but when it comes to drawing straight lines, it's actually not bad. So let's draw some leaves as well. So the lines here are thicker. Let's reduce the thickness of the brush. So the lines here are also very smooth. The main difference I can see here is you can see the lines here, they taper quite nicely, but the lines here, they don't taper as nicely. The end of the line, it's quite abrupt, so that affects drawing. So each pen has its limitation, and you have to kind of work around the limitation. When it comes to drawing organic subjects like this, where there are no straight lines, you can actually disguise the limitation of the pen. I mean, sometimes the wobbly lines will be obvious, but sometimes it's the inability to taper that will be obvious. Okay, the latency on the Xiaomi tablet is definitely much better. So this is my normal drawing speed, and I can feel the latency is much better. I've just reduced the brush size to help me draw those smaller or thinner lines more easily. I guess if I draw really quick strokes, I can get the lines to taper a bit more nicely. But I definitely will have to reduce the brush size to help me get those thinner lines. It really helps a lot. This is what I have so far. The Huawei M Pencil has wobbly lines, but the strokes taper better. The Xiaomi M Pencil has straighter lines, but the strokes don't taper as nicely. The lines not being able to taper nicely with the Xiaomi pen is one big reason why I prefer to draw with this app, Concepts. So this is the pencil brush that I'm using in Concepts. And with this brush, when I press hard, the lines will be darker. And when I don't apply any pressure, the lines will be thinner. So this brush does not react with pressure sensitivity in the sense that the lines, they do not become thicker or thinner. Let me switch over to this brush. So it doesn't matter if the lines don't taper here, because the look of this sketch is more stylized. This is the same sketch drawn with Concepts. This is a vector illustration app, so I can zoom in all the way and the details will still remain sharp. So here you can see the lines, they end quite abruptly, but that's the style of this pencil. Let's see what happens when I draw with the ink brush. This brush reacts to pressure sensitivity. You can see some wobbliness. The lines, they don't taper. So that's the limitation here. It looks alright. It's not perfect, definitely. This sketch was drawn with an earlier model of the MatePad Pro, also with the M Pencil, which has better pressure sensitivity. However, the brush I used here is the same pencil brush you saw earlier, so pressure sensitivity doesn't matter because the thickness of the lines will be consistent. So this is how this particular sketch looks. So in this case, pressure sensitivity doesn't matter. However, when you're using brushes that taper, pressure sensitivity is important. And now let's draw some shops. This is the MatePad Pro. These are diagonal lines. Yep, I can see some wobble. When you are drawing with moderate speed, straight lines are easy to draw. The lines can be straight, and for this sketch I can actually draw quite fast, so I don't have to worry about wobbly lines. As I'm drawing, you may notice some latency as the line is trying to catch up with the pen tip. And let's have some diagonal lines here. I'm not sure if you can see the wobble, but there is slight wobble. And also there is latency. Let's draw a bit faster for the straighter lines. So this is what I have. It wasn't too difficult as long as I was drawing a bit faster. Anyway, drawing buildings, it's easy, relatively speaking, because you can draw straight lines faster. When it comes to drawing all these squiggly lines, using the Huawei M Pencil is actually quite enjoyable because you can get the line variation, the thin and thick lines easily. Notice how the strokes, how they curve, how they taper. And this is the Xiaomi tablet. The lines are straight, that's for sure, but the lines are not able to taper as nicely compared to the Huawei M Pencil. So sometimes when it comes to drawing, it makes you feel like you are drawing with a marker instead of with a brush that can taper. I can still vary the thickness of the lines. For example, let's draw some potted plants here. Oh, another issue here is when it comes to drawing plants, sometimes I want to draw the plants with tapered lines, but here you can see it's difficult. For example, I want the lines to taper like this, but it's difficult here. Pen performance for both pens, the Xiaomi and the Huawei pens are definitely not as good compared to the Apple Pencil. I mean, you really have to know what are the limitations and whether or not you can accept the limitations. If you want the best drawing performance, then definitely go with the Apple Pencil and the iPads. It may not be obvious here, but the variation of the lines, the thin and thick lines, is not as obvious compared to what I was able to get with the Huawei M Pencil. So here I'm trying to draw the trees in the background again. With the Huawei M Pencil earlier, I was able to get those thin and thick lines really easily. But here you can see the variation, it's not as obvious. The thin and the thick lines, that variation is not as obvious. So which tablet do I recommend, the Xiaomi or the MatePad Pro? Well, as mentioned right at the start of the video, because the Huawei tablet doesn't have Google Play Store, that to me is a deal breaker. So I would say go with the Xiaomi. Anyway, both pens have their limitations, so just take note of that.